Okay, welcome back to the last session of today. It's a very great pleasure for all of us to now welcome one of the most distinctive voices in contemporary cinema. For more than 5 decades, his films have explored the complex relationship between the human body, technology, and identity. Works such as Videodrome, The Fly, Crash, and more recently, Crimes of the Future and The Shrouds invite us to rethink the boundaries between biology, media, and human experience. Long before many of today's debates about biotechnology, artificial bodies, and technological transformation emerged in science and ethics, David Cronenberg's cinema had already begun to imagine their cultural and philosophical implication. His work reminds us that the human body is not only a biological organism, but also a place where imagination, fear, desire, transformation unfold. And so I believe it seems to be particularly fitting to welcome him to a conference that is framed by one of humanity's oldest questions. Quid est homo, qui est homo? David Cronenberg explores these questions in powerful and unmistakable ways. David, it's such a great pleasure to have you. Welcome.
I've really been enjoying it here, and thank you for having me. It's his fault that I'm here, so...
David, when we approached you a couple of months ago, and I know you're a man who's been traveling all over the world for most of his career for well-known reasons, what were your first thoughts and why did you accept this invitation?
Well, because I thought that I wouldn't be talking about movies. Because normally I'm answering the same questions all the time. It's like performing Hamlet every night, you know, it's the same dialogue, but you try to give it interesting spins. And just today I did an interview with Radio Vaticano, and some of the questions were very familiar to me, but it's always a challenge and exciting to try to be creative and innovative in your answers without lying, you know, but this was, the focus here is not on cinema. Nobody's going to ask me, how was it working with Viggo Mortensen? And that's a relief. You know, there'll be some other questions, which maybe I won't be able to answer as well as that one, but because it was great working with Viggo. But we'll be talking about some other things, and that's exciting.
Before we discuss your work and your approach, your understanding of the human condition, the human body, let's perhaps go back and explain and talk a little bit about your biography, your early biography, where you grew up and when you took your first steps to the university and into film. You grew up in Toronto, you were born in Toronto, and I believe the atmosphere in your family was more than open to intellectual stimulus and art.
Yes. My father was a writer. I used to fall asleep to the sound of his typewriter. And so for me to be a writer was a very natural thing. My mother was a musician. She was a pianist. Her brother was a violinist, so there was always music and books in the house. My father was a bibliophile. During the Depression, I mean, he was a very sweet, in some ways naive man. During the Depression, he had a bookstore called the Professor's Bookstore, in which he sold books like James Joyce's Ulysses and so on. And at the time, nobody was buying books like that. You know, they were buying books about how you could fix your house up when it was broken. This was the Depression. And so ultimately his bookstore failed and all those books came into our house. So I was basically living in a bookstore, kind of. And it was a very wonderful, I had a very lovely, wonderful childhood. My parents were very sweet and very lovely people. I did think that I would be, ultimately I thought I would be a novelist. And it was only later, many years later, under the influence of the New York Underground and so on, that I was kind of seduced by cinema. And I ended up writing movies instead of novels. I have written one novel called Consumed. I have copies here. If you no, I don't really. But and I only recently now, have written a script based on that book. Maybe we'll get it financed, maybe we won't. But in any case, it possibly could be my next movie. We'll see. So when I went to the University of Toronto, my first year I was studying organic chemistry, and I really thought I would be a scientist and a writer. I would be like Isaac Asimov, who was a practicing scientist, but he also was a very famous and successful science fiction writer. And I thought that seemed like a good fit for me. And I thought I was interested in organic chemistry, and I think I was going to I was particularly interested in cell biology. But after that first year, I realized that I was not suited for that profession, because I think I was much too impatient to do the kind of research and work that would be required. And I thought I would rather invent my own science, and then I wouldn't have to study for years and practice it in a professional way. I would just invent it. And so that's partly the inspiration for me for making movies, was to become the scientist that I never really was.
You changed from organic chemistry to literature at the university then?
Yes, it was a course called English Language and Literature, and it was a study of the English language and literature going back to Anglo-Saxon, the origins of the English language. And it was there, for example, since, I mean, one of the reasons I'm interested also in coming to the Vatican was because if you were studying English language and Middle English, medieval English, the church was a huge influence on poets and writers of the time. And you really could not understand what they were talking about if you did not have some understanding of Catholicism at the time and the power and influence of the church. So that was one of the reasons that, coming here has great resonance for me in that particular way, not as a religion, but as a sort of literary influence in a way.
So with that unusual constellation of influences, when you were young, literature, chemistry, philosophy, media theory, what drew you to film? Why did you take that direction, that you thought, I want to make movies, become a movie director, or how did that happen?
Okay, so there's a story I have to tell that I've told many times. I have friends who've they've heard me tell this story many times, but I'll tell it to you. In Toronto, every Saturday, there would be a stream of children like lemmings coming from everywhere in the neighborhood that I lived in, which actually was half Jewish and half Italian, actually. And we would be coming by ourselves without parents. People were not as paranoid then about letting their children run around on the streets. And I would go to a cinema called The Pylon, and it was a cinema that showed cowboy movies on Saturday, cowboy movies, pirate movies, cartoons, and so on, for children primarily. So we were all just children in the audience. And but across the street from that was a movie house called The Studio that only showed Italian films in Italian. And that was for the Italian immigrant population, mostly Sicilian, that lived in the area. And one day I came out of seeing what was probably a Hopalong Cassidy cowboy movie, and I noticed that across the street, people were coming out of the studio, having seen some Italian film, and they were adults, there were no children, and they were all crying. They were weeping on the street. They were sobbing and holding each other and walking out. And I thought, what movie could make adults cry, weep on the street? And so I crossed the road and I looked to see what the movie was, and it was La Strada of Fellini. And I thought that was, to me, the first moment that I felt that cinema could have great power and was a serious art form and not just a children's sort of entertainment. And then, of course, later I saw La Strada, and then I was weeping on the street. You know, I can almost do that now. So, yeah. So after that, I also had a technological interest in how do movies get made? What is this? What do you do? Because I think young people these days are very savvy about how cinema is made, and you can make and edit a film on your phone. But then it was a big mystery. I didn't know anything about how many people were involved in making a film, editing, camera. So I started to do research. I looked in the Encyclopedia Britannica for camera and photography and sound recording and so on, lens. And gradually I thought, well, I have to try this. And it was also the New York Underground, Andy Warhol, Ed M. Schwiller. These were the Kuchar brothers. These were New York filmmakers who said, you know, it was the 60s, you know, so it was a do your own thing. You don't have to go to film school. You don't have to work on a professional film. If you want to make films, grab a camera and you get your friends and make a film. That was the idea. And so I did that, actually. My first films were exactly that. They were underground films, basically. And I still felt that my destiny was to be a novelist. Little did I know that it would only be 50 years later that I would write a novel. But I was basically seduced by cinema at that point, you know, without realizing that that was what was happening.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like as a film director and author, you want to share a story, or is it more visionary? Do you want to share your visions, particularly in that field that you work in?
I don't think that prophecy is the province of art, frankly. I don't think, and even though there were science fiction writers like Arthur C. Clarke who loved to be able to say, I anticipated satellites before there were communication satellites and so on, that was never my interest. It was basically my means of exploring the human condition, you know, basically what is it to be a human being? How do you talk to yourself about that? Well, if you're a creative person, and I think actually everybody is creative in some way, but if you're a creative person specifically this way, you're saying, I'm saying to the audience, I have noticed this about the way humans live and how I live, and I'm creating a little narrative to kind of question it and examine it, and I'm inviting you, the audience, to come along with me to see if it's of interest to you. I always questioned what Alfred Hitchcock used to say about his movie making. He felt that he was a puppet master, you know, and that the audience were his puppets, and he would make you cry when he wanted you to cry, and then he would make you laugh, and he would make you sad. I never felt that way. I always felt that I have no idea how my audience is actually going to react to these things. They have the freedom to react in any way that they want. I'm not really trying to control them. I'm inviting them, once again, as I said, to experience what I've experienced and see how they feel about it.
Mm-hmm. When you say the human condition, what is a human being? Is that what is really the focus of your work? And let me ask you, after 5 decades of producing and working for 4 decades.
Are you saying I'm old?
No, no,
ageism,
no.
You know,
I'm
young.
Three after three.
Somebody else's movie, right? Sorry.
No, but are you? Would you say that you are still struggling with this question about the human condition? What is the human being, or are you developing new perspectives to
Oh
look at
no,
it?
I'm being playful. This is the thing. To make movies is to be playful. I think being creative is playfulness. We have the innate desire to play, and I think that's part of how we engage the world. I think even on Ingmar Bergman's sets, Ingmar Bergman, Swedish director, very dark, very heavy, that his film sets were very funny and very light, and people were joking and playful. And I think that we are like children playing in a sandbox, and we were doing funny voices and pretending we're other people, and we are creating things that we play with. So it's really playfulness. It's the desire to be playful and to create things, and almost it's a desire to fuse with the world as it is. The world is creative and beyond evolution, and I want to be creative as well. I want to contribute creativity to the world to create things. That's how it feels to me. So that's my approach really to making film. It's not really so much a struggle at all. I mean, the struggle is to get financing. The struggle is to seduce that one actor who can get you your film financed. But once you've got that, it's all play. I mean, people laugh on my film set a lot, including me.
So, how would you describe then, with that playfulness that you've had and approached that subject, how would you describe the human condition? What is it? What is the human being? That's our question here.
Yeah, the human being is a wonderful creation of the universe. This is my approach. Thousands and thousands of years of evolution and other influences and so on, and a creature that is endlessly fascinating and complex. There's a scientist, a Nobel Prize winner named Gerald Edelman, who said at one point, I read several of his books, and one of them, and he says that the brain is not like a computer. It's much more like a rainforest. And there's a struggle, a Darwinian struggle amongst the neurons in your brain, and the constant withering and growing. Of course, we know that the brain is not a static thing now, although it used to be considered a totally static thing. We know that it's a constantly evolving, struggling, creative thing. And I think that the human body is that. I think the whole human body is like a rainforest. We now know that there's a sense that the body itself has memory. The cells in the body that are not the brain, memory and mind are not constricted, they're not in solitary confinement in your skull. Every cell in your body has the ability to communicate and to remember. So it's this. That's what I think. A human being is, and of course, as a filmmaker, what do we photograph most in film? It's the human body, the face, the body. That is our subject. That's the subject matter of filmmaking, is the human body. And I don't mean that in a lifeless way. I'm including speech and as part of the body, body language. We talk about body language as a metaphor, but I think that's also quite literal, that the body speaks. So that all comes together for me. It's not that there's a mystery trying to unlock. It's just an endlessly fascinating subject. When I started to study the cell biology, we're talking 50 years ago, half a century, it was so simple, the concept of what a cell was, a human body cell. And now it has revealed itself as being incredibly complex and variable and creative and communicative. I mean, it's quite such a huge difference between the two, the study of the two things. So that's it.
In one of our Zoom meetings before this conference, which I enjoyed very much because I learned so much about you and from you, you said body is reality.
Yes.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that? And is that our human reality, or is there more to that reality?
What I meant was, I think in the 60s, I had one LSD trip. And I know that Fellini used to talk about his one or two LSD trips. And I had a similar experience, although I wasn't a well-known filmmaker at the time. And it was a fantastic experience. And I thought that I would do it many times, and I never did it again. And I think it was because I also was afraid of it. But it made it reality changed for me in that trip. It was a completely different reality, and it made me realize that there is no absolute reality. It is, for us. So I explained it this way. It's a very simple way. You are sitting in a room and you have your pet dog, and you are both experiencing reality, but your reality and the dog's reality are completely different. The dog's sense of smell is incredible and well beyond your own, but its eyesight is not as good as your eyesight. So if you were to suddenly be your dog, your reality would be completely different. And it's a bodily thing. To me, that's what it is. It's not a spiritual thing or a theoretical thing. It's all because of the body and how your specific body senses the environment and interacts. I mean, there is a book, wasn't it called, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? What would it be like to be a bat in a cave? What is that animals, creatures, reality? It is a reality, but it's not a shared reality, It's so that's when I say body is reality, I mean it in that way.
What about the English language has these three terms, actually one more than the German language, Geist and Seele. What about these categories, mind, soul, spirit? Is that, or are they a category that also have a certain reality to you, or is that something that is difficult for you to define or to get into?
I have experienced all those things, and to me, they're all one thing. I mean, I think it's just all different. It's like a diamond with different facets, but it's still one diamond. It feels like that to me.
And that would be body?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I'm an atheist. I don't, I think when you die, you die. You decompose, and your chemicals and your, everything goes, it's recycled, let's say, but that's not the same thing as still being alive. And to me, that's just that is a reality of existence as a human being, and I think I'm basically an existentialist in that way, or a phenomenologist, I guess.
Your movies, when you read about your incredible body of artistic work,
Body?
yes,
Just saying.
infected. He's infected with music. When you read about it, and of course when you watch your movies, you always hear or read these terms horror movies, or critics very often refer to you as the founding father of body horror. Do you like to be tagged like that? Are you a horror movie film director?
No. I don't. I reject the term body horror because what people are seeing as horrible, I'm actually seeing as quite beautiful and intriguing and fantastic. But it's really a marketing term, I have to say. It came at the beginning of my career as a young filmmaker. If you were making a genre film, a film that could be said to be a horror film, then you could get it financed and you could get it distributed. The distributors would know how to finance it, to sell it. And so it was convenient to say, I make horror films. And I hung out with other horror filmmakers like George Romero and John Carpenter, and we knew each other, and we were all making horror films, except my films were quite different, which those filmmakers did recognize that, because I think of them as being like philosophical essays, basically. And it's sort of a mixed blessing, because, to say body horror, well, listen, in my obituary, and it has been written, by the way, by Janet Maslin. Seriously. I had a conversation with this critic who used to be a film critic for the New York Times, and she phoned me up out of the blue. I'd never talked to her before, and she said she was wanting to write a piece for the New York Times, and she was asking me all kinds of interesting questions. And then I realized that she was writing my obituary, because they write it in advance. I'm 83 now, and so I guess after you hit 80, and they think you're interesting, your death will be interesting. So, yes. So she said, that in your obituary, the first thing that's going to be there is body horror, the master, the creator of the body horror genre. So I accept this, this is the cross I have to bear. And so, but many of my films are not genre films. They are not categorized. You can't categorize them. It's just, it's the way it is.
Here and there, I read that the audience, part of the audience, a few members of the audience, leave a Cronenberg movie because they may be shocked, or I don't know, for whatever reason. Is that part of the game, in the sense that, well, that's typically a Cronenberg that fits into this genre and what he stands for? Or do you rather feel like, oh, please stay, you paid for the ticket?
I had people leave, I've had people faint. But once again, I say I actually do not know how an audience is going to react to any film that I've made. I have no idea. And for example, I made a film called Crash. This is not the one that won the Academy Awards. This is a better one. But when I made it, it was based on a J.G. Ballard novel that had been written almost 20 years before I made the movie. And so I thought, it's well established. People know this movie. I'm going to do a version of it. There's no way of actually translating a book to the cinema. You are actually creating something new that somehow feels like the book, but it can never be exactly the book. The first movie that I made that was based on a novel was The Dead Zone. And people who love that Stephen King novel really thought the movie was the book. But when you read the book and you see the movie, you see how different they are. But that's what you try to do when you adapt a novel. So Crash, I thought, well, it's well established and it'll be an interesting movie, maybe quite strange, because Ballard really touched some nerves. And then we showed it at the Cannes Film Festival, and it was, people were shocked. Wow. And it was a huge scandal, and people left the theater, and then we had a press conference where they were all yelling at me. And they had so many journalists there that they had to add a different room with a video feed. And one famous English journalist, which stood up, and I had all my actors with me and my producer, because you do a press conference after you have a screening, and he stood up and he said, "This is a film beyond the bounds of depravity." And I thought, really? I was pretty impressed. I thought I didn't realize I was doing that. People were very upset. Now, a few years ago, we showed a new version, 4K digital version of Crash at the Venice Film Festival, special screening, full of very young people, very young audience. Nobody laughed. Nobody was shocked. People were just very interested. So time has changed this film that was such a scandal and such a depraved film to being a kind of interesting historical event in cinema. And it's just social evolution in a way, changing. And so I realize, of course, and I knew this beforehand, though, that people sometimes say, well, now that you're very old, what do you think? Are you thinking about your legacy? I think not really. I mean, you can't control how people will see what you've done. Any artist knows this. Some artists in the past were very famous, and they're pretty much unheard of now because the work hasn't resonated. There was a time when Shakespeare was considered not very good, you know? And then there are other filmmakers who were obscure and are now very influential, like, let's say, Kafka. So, no, I don't think about my legacy and it is for exactly those reasons. And let me just say, I do think, and this is a cliche, but I do think that your films are like children, your children. They go out into the world. You have given them everything you can give them, but you no longer are in control of anything. They will live their own life. They will have their own life. And there's only some reflection back on you. And if your film is a living thing somehow, then it will have its own life aside from your life.
Here in Rome, we're talking about engineering life, an interesting term. You know that our NCCR, Molecular Systems Engineering, is working in that field. I work in that field as an ethicist and don't understand most of the science that is going on after many years. But what I do sense here and there is that modern natural scientists, particularly working in that field, speak about the human body as almost an engineering platform that should and could be redesigned or modified. Do you think that is a development that you also share or that you also see? And is that a good direction science is taking here?
Well, I'm a little wary of the term engineering. I like it, but it suggests something very cold, very mechanical, very calculated, very controlled. And I don't think the human body is any of those things. It's a very living, complex rainforest, basically, and is not easily to be engineered. And it's so integrated in so many ways with the billions of cells that compose our bodies that I think there are always unintended consequences when you mess with the human body. And yet, because we are playful and because we are curious, we've always not accepted the human body as given to us. I mean, thousands and thousands of years ago, people were doing surgery and trepanning and boring holes in the skull and decorating the body and mutilating the body and scarification of the body for various cultural reasons. So we've never just been passive about our bodies. We've always been artistically intertwined with our bodies. And so I see interesting trends scientifically. I can't speak for, obviously, the community, the scientific community, but what I've noticed recently is this very strange, very strong intersection between biology and capitalism. And you've heard people talk about it here very well. The idea of freezing oocytes, human eggs, human sperm, the selling of buying and selling of human organs, the idea that the human body could be quite an interesting commercial source of various obscure but valuable products, and that people have, you see even, I mean, even with something as silly as TikTok influencers, men and women making careers out of their bodies as they modify them, paint them, restructure them, clothe them. A lot of the problems that you've heard here about actualizing the benefits to human beings in terms of health all come down to the nature of capitalism, that you can't get these things financed. It's politics. But I think it's also a capitalistic problem of the nature, the predatory nature of capitalism. I'm not a Marxist, believe me, but capitalism does have its downsides.
In your films, we very often encounter mutations and transformation of the body. And I'm wondering, is this a metaphor for creativity and evolution when you place these images in your films? Or is it rather, is it also a warning perhaps, or a temptation of technological power?
Well, a lot of it is storytelling. It's not really an agenda that I have, a political agenda. It's, as the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw said, conflict is the essence of drama. If you're going to create a drama, you need some kind of conflict. Nobody really wants to see a movie where everybody is sweet and nice and nothing bad happens. I mean, that's a very boring movie. You create a conflict yourself with your characters and so on, in order to create a narrative that will reveal things that will be playful, but also perhaps instructive. But as I say, I don't really have an agenda per se. It's very, of course, it's very intuitive. It's very sort of passionate. A lot of it comes from my own life. People who know me see many things that they know about me in my movies. Some of the movies that I've made, like my last movie called The Shrouds, is fairly, in a strange way, fairly autobiographical, but in ways that if you didn't know me, you'd never recognize it. But and so I think I think all art is in some ways autobiographical, even if it's very obscure, and also political, actually, because it comes from a social, political construct that you're making your film, let's say, out of. And whether you mean it to be political or not, it has its political resonances. So I think those things are inescapable. You don't have to really push it. Some films are particularly obviously political because they deal with people who are politicians, let's say, but that's not the only kind of politics that art embodies.
Here and there, I get the impression that in some of your films, the body knows something before the mind does. Like particularly in the film Crimes of the Future, which is a recent one, 2022. It's quite an interesting story there. I don't know if I can summarize it correctly. If not, please interrupt me. But there are people who are developing new mutations and new biological capacities, and some begin to grow unknown organs in their bodies. And what is striking about this is that these transformations, maybe other or than today, are not hidden. As a matter of fact, these people make big art events out of this happening. There's surgery which is being filmed. People are taking out these unknown organs. They are name tattooed, and we're gonna have a look at this film now in a short trailer, and then we'll perhaps discuss briefly what inspired you to that, and if maybe I missed out on something, the story. Okay, so we're gonna show you a short sequence of that movie now, A Crimes of the Future. Don't leave.
I can feel you pulling things around in there.
It's a brand new organ. Never before seen. We've all thought that the body was empty. Empty of meaning. And we've wanted to confirm it, so that we could fill it with meaning.
The world is a much more dangerous place now that pain has all but disappeared.
Surgery is sex, isn't it?
Is it?
You know it is. Surgery is the new sex.
I don't like what's happening with the body. In particular, what's happening with my body. Which is why I keep cutting it up. What do you think they'd find inside it?
Outer space.
Whoops. Sorry.
Let us not be afraid to map the chaos inside. Let us create that will guide us into the heart of darkness.
Looks pretty good. I forgot most of it.
It's always hard and maybe doesn't make much sense to ask an artist, what did you mean by it? But how did you get that idea, and what inspired you to this idea that surgery is the new sex? That's one quote out of the movie, I believe, that all of a sudden people who appear to be very without any emotions, you could say on the one side that it is an improvement. They can take care of these new organs themselves, but it does not seem like a world we want to experience, right?
You don't?
No.
Well, for you. I mean, you're missing a lot. I don't remember. I mean, I actually wrote that script 20 years ago, and then I only got to make it about 3 years ago. So for some reason, after I wrote it, I got distracted. I made some other movies, and then I had a producer in Toronto who really was very passionate about getting it made. And he kept trying to convince me to make it. And eventually I said, look, I think, it's obsolete now because science and technology and strange things have been happening. And I think it's not relevant, really. And he said, you should read your own script. It's more relevant than ever. And I thought, well, that's a very good line. Okay, it's more relevant to him. And I read it, and I thought, yeah, he's right. It has some relevance. Don't ask me what it is now because I've forgotten what the relevance is. But just it partly has to do with the commercialization of the body, as I was saying, and its concomitant use as an artistic object. Other than that, I can't really say, what it is.
Science tests hypotheses about the world, I would argue, but in a different way. Does your art, test our values? Is it a test to our values?
Well, as I say, I don't feel that I'm a prophet or a teacher, I don't, but I do think that art, it should be provocative of thought. Excuse me, my voice is kind of going. So, yeah, art should really put your mind into another reality while you are experiencing it, and provoke thoughts about various things. Primarily, as I say, the human condition. And other than that, it's pretty straightforward for me intuitively.
But you think that your films or cinema in general can touch the viewer, the audience, in a way that other media like music or books cannot? What is the role? What is the strength of cinema in that respect?
I think all art forms, they wax and wane. I mean, there's just the strength of various art forms depends on so many social and cultural and technological changes. So I don't think the cinema it was initially considered to be an entertainment for housemaids. That's what the cinema was considered. People who went to the cinema were very low class, working class, beyond working class, and only gradually did it reveal itself to be capable of being a very powerful art form. So it's not as though cinema has innately got more power than, say, the novel or so on. Of course, to read a novel, you have to be literate. To see a movie, you also have to be literate. And when they show films when films were first shown to people who had never seen a film before, I remember that they would really think that these things in the screen were going to come out at them, and they would go behind the screen to see where the people went and stuff. It was very interesting. So you really still need film literacy to engage with the art of cinema. It's not obvious. So I don't know that cinema has the ultimate power. There'll become some other art form that will supplant it, maybe. Or right now, people are talking about streaming and Netflix and saying that the streaming series is the new cinema, and that certainly it's more like a novel. When you see a 10-hour TV series, it is much more like the experience of reading a novel, because it goes on and can be much more complex than, let's say, a 2-hour movie. And I have been tempted to do a streaming series myself. It is a temptation, because it is a different. The rhythm of it is quite different than a film. So yeah.
You mentioned The Shrouds, which is your most recent film, 2024. And in that film, you approached the body from a very different angle than the films before, through grief and memory and enduring presence of the dead. It asks what happens when technology no longer only transforms life, but also mediates our relationship with death and with mourning. Let's have a brief look at the trailer of that movie and talk about that film.
When they lowered my wife into the coffin, I had an intense urge to get into the box with her.
You never considered cremation?
How dark are you willing to go? Those are the shrouds.
You mean like burial shrouds?
Not exactly. It's basically a kind of camera in her grave.
Don't you find it hard to take? It comforts me. It's like she's floating in outer space.
Word of warning. If these shrouds can be weaponized, people will find a way to do it. They found something.
What is that?
Where did that video come from? It's walking amongst the wreckage.
Brutal. Some real hatred there. What's the motive?
You used to say that they were killing your sister in the hospital.
I just knew they were constantly edging towards experimental treatments they weren't being upfront about.
You still have her dental records here.
We still do. Do you want JPEGs?
It's obvious they were tracking you through her.
Why would anyone want to try to?
Well, you tell me. Made a career out of bodies. I'm so happy to be involved.
Involved?
It makes me feel so alive.
Paranoid now. It was a good year. Desecration wasn't just random. She's in my head, my dreams, my life.
Could be mean, I wonder.
What's going on?
I can't believe it.
The Shrouds.
It's not meant for the living.
Maybe not meant for the dead either.
Very interesting. It reminds me of or suggests a new intimacy of grieving, a new intimacy with the dead. Is that something that we could want? I mean, since technology gives us many new options in this regard, as your film shows, should we look into that? Because it would make things easier for us as those who are left behind, or is that...
Yes. Well, this is, in its own way, a very personal film for me. My wife of 43 years died in 2017, and many of the things that my lead character, played by Vincent Cassel, says and thinks and feels are things that I thought and said and felt. A lot of critics noticed that our hair was very similar, and they felt that I was, that this character was obviously me. But in fact, it was an accident that Vincent's hair happened to look like this. Often his head is shaved for some of his roles, and I would have had him play the role with a shaved head. So there was that strange, I was sort of saying, this is very autobiographical, but not really. This character is an entrepreneur. He has invented a new kind of cemetery. He has a restaurant that is combined with the cemetery. I am not an entrepreneur. I don't own a graveyard, although I've been thinking about it. And yet, emotionally, it's very close to my heart. When he says, when my wife was buried, I wanted to get in the box with her, I had that exact feeling. And it was very direct and physical and exact. And I was surprised by it at the time, but as with many things, because you can anticipate your own death, you can anticipate how you will feel when someone close to you dies, but you don't really know until it happens. And in my case, I was surprised by many, many aspects of that. I could go on. But so I didn't immediately want to make a film that expressed those things, but after some years, I found that I did. And people said to me, so did that help? Did it lessen the grieving? And the answer was no, it didn't. It had no effect on that at all. But that's not what it was for. I wasn't doing that to exercise those experiences. Once again, in its own weird but beautiful way, it was being playful about death and the response to death and grief and stuff. Playful in the sense of creating a narrative and creating a visual landscape and so on. The premises of it is that this man has created a graveyard in which you see the decaying corpse of whoever's been buried there. And you have an app and you can watch it and relate to it in a totally physical way. Absolutely no boundaries between that dead body that used to be a living body and very important to you and now is disintegrating. And it's sort of saying, not everybody would want to do that. You know, how many people would really want that? The cemeteries have screens that you can watch it on, and you have an app that you can look at this anytime you want. And is it grotesque? Is it, is it horrifying, or is it really beautiful? You know, and that's sort of one of the questions is would you really do that? And of course, in some of the scenes that you've seen there, he's trying to have another. He wants to have another romance. He wants to be in love again, and he has a date with a woman, and he feels that by telling her about this graveyard of his and even showing her his decaying wife, that in some way he's being seductive and attractive. And of course, she's totally horrified and says, I don't think you're ready for another relationship. And ends the blind date. I did have a blind date that was very similar to that, although I didn't have a graveyard to show her. But so even at that level, it's autobiographical, sort of. You always, even if you're trying to be accurate in your autobiography, you are lying a lot and inventing a lot, inevitably.
I think these comments are not only most interesting to me personally, but they add to the openness and to the discussion of this conference tremendously. And I'm very glad that you're so open about it and also personal to a certain degree. I'm coming to the end with my catalog of questions, then we'll open up the discussion. Dave, you sat through the complete session today with jet lag, and so apparently there was something for you to see, to hear. Maybe you can, after day one, tell us briefly, what was your impression about what you saw and what you heard? And is that in a way inspiring? Do you disagree most of the time? Do you agree here and there? Do you learn? I don't know.
Well, you are all going to be in my next novel. And I'm not paying you anything. And also you won't get a credit. But it is inspiring, and it's lovely, and it's a wonderful group of people. Film is its own little bubble, its own little world. I've been to the Cannes Film Festival many times, the Venice Film Festival, and the Lisbon Film Festival, many film festivals, Toronto, of course. But it's not a group like this. I have done panels and so on talking about cinema, but it's a very different tone here, a very different intellectual level and emotional level. And though many of my characters in my films are doctors and scientists, I don't really know too many doctors and scientists other than the ones who've been operating on me and so on. And so it's lovely to be interacting, as much as we have done with you all. So it's been terrific. It's really been, and I might well make a movie that starts off with, a conference in the Vatican. It feels like a real thing. I have to tell you, I'm not kidding.
Well, we'll monitor that development. David, we were thinking about what kind of little small present could we give you, for being here and for sharing all these most interesting thoughts and was huge discussions, and then we finally came to the right conclusion in my mind. We give you a box of Swiss chocolate. Well, with the Matterhorn. And the reason being is that, and I can tell you from my own very, very dramatic experience, the more you eat from it, the faster body transformation starts. It might end in body horror even, so be careful.
I can't wait to try it. And I was terrified that you were going to give me a plaque, that said, lifetime achievement. I've had about 20 lifetime achievement awards. How many lifetimes can you achieve things? So this is much more appreciated than something like that. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, David.
Well, thank you.
So now the floor is yours. Alexander Benyak is there with a microphone, and we're monitoring if an online question comes in. Please, Professor Ward.
So thank you, David, for a very inspiring talk. I'm right here. And so at the onset of your presentation, you mentioned on several instances creativity. And the reason I'm raising the point is that at universities, we educate scientists with knowledge, but actually, you know, the real scientific breakthroughs, they come through creativity. And there's no way nobody knows how to teach creativity. And I was wondering whether you would have some insight, you know, retrospectively, how have you become creative?
I love children. I particularly love babies, but I love children, and they are all creative. They all are creative. And I think we are innately creative, a species. And sometimes it is filtered out of us for whatever reasons, socially, because of our education system or whatever. But I knew right from the beginning that to be a scientist would be is a creative endeavor. And so my decision not to be a scientist had nothing to do with that aspect of it. It had to do with my own personal kind of impatience and so on, as I said. But yes, you can't teach creativity, but you can certainly encourage it, and you can allow it its freedom. I really think that's the key, is the education. I think I must confess that in my first year in organic chemistry, I was feeling the students that were around me, and I felt that they were innately quite different from me in some ways. I could not tell you how, but that was one of the reasons that I thought that I was in the wrong profession, that I was aiming for the wrong profession. At the same time, though, I never doubted that the wellspring of science is also curiosity combined with creativity. Those are the two things, and the two things for filmmaking as well. So I really think that's what it is. It's a matter of encouraging it from a very young age. It doesn't always happen because parents are often obsessed with control, because children are hard to control. They are difficult creatures. But, and it's not easy necessarily, especially when you're trying to survive in hard times, let's say financially or whatever, to allow children to have that freedom to exercise their creativity. But I think that's a key thing. I think it starts there.
More questions, comments?
I'd be flattered if there are no more questions, because it would mean that I've answered every possible question.
Ivan.
So when the trailers were shown, I was watching them.
Yes.
And you seemed very interested, as if you were seeing them for the first time.
Yes.
So are they effectively like children that you experience in different ways as they grow and as they develop their life?
No, it's as I descend into senility, I keep forgetting everything I've done. So it was like looking at the first. There is some truth in that. I don't really dwell on my old films. I don't watch them again. I just keep thinking of the next film. So I'm often surprised at my own work, actually. I don't know if you have had this experience, but it's not as though all of the work that you've done, and it's, as I say, it's horrifying to think, but it's been over half a century that I've been making films. You don't really, they're not all present in every detail in your mind as they were when you were creating them. So you can be surprised by your own work. And yeah, I was surprised. I had a very emotional reaction, as though I thought, wow, these are this is pretty good. You know, this is interesting. I can relate to that. So that's really what it was. But you're right when you notice them.
It's over there. Please.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you so much for your sort of sharing about your artistic and creative process. I'm really interested in creative processing from a neuroscience perspective, I mean, as well as in general. But I'm curious what you think that, that creativity is. Is it the recombination of ideas that you've seen previously? Are they spontaneously generated, totally novel ideas? Or are they random? You know, where do these ideas come from, and how do you see that process generating? I think you said something about the universe giving the creative process to humans, or something like this. So I'm really curious to hear more about what you do.
Yeah, I don't think it's mysterious, but it is very intuitive, and it, you know, when you make a film, when you are creating characters, I mean, when you make a film, you are engineering life. You are creating characters who you want to be alive. So it is this interesting fantasy version of engineering life. But you have the freedom to be irresponsible. You know, you do not have an agenda, and you do not have responsibility, and that is part of the freedom, is that you are. I mean, that's why I was attacked for Crash, for example. People thought this was very irresponsible. At one point, Ted Turner, the famous Ted Turner who invented CNN and so on, I met him. He was married to Jane Fonda at the time, and they both condemned Crash. And then one day I was at the Oscars because my friend Howard Shore won some Oscars there, and I was on a lineup with Ted Turner finally, and I said, you know, why you said as a critique of Crash that it will encourage teenagers to have sex in cars, and I said, you know, teenagers have been doing that since there were cars, so why do you think my movie would make that happen? He said, well, I don't know. He said, he said, they've taken the tomahawk out of my hand now, because he was no longer in charge of CNN. So anyway, this is a strange anecdote that I felt the need to tell you. I don't know why. But basically, you have to allow yourself to be irresponsible. I don't think that is not the purpose of art. I don't think is to sort of express responsibility. It's to say, in a safe way, I mean, that's with horror, for example. I think the attraction of horror films is that you are in a cinema, you are in a safe space, and you are allowing yourself to experience things that, if they actually happened in reality, would be terrifying and destructive. But you need to somehow acknowledge their existence, but you want to do it in a way that it will not be actually destructive to you. So, excuse me. So I think that's the case for all art, not just horror films. All art should be dangerous, really. At one point, I wrote an article called "The Crime of Art." You know, the idea that in some ways art should be criminal in terms of crossing the normal boundaries of civil society, which I do believe in and live in, but there are elements of us that need to experience that criminal, if you want to call it that, aspect of existence and social existence. And art is one way that we can experience that in a relatively safe way, unless, of course, the art completely deranges you, then that's another question, you know. But so that's how I see it, basically.
Thank you.
Is there another question? Then please.
Oh,
Thank you very much again. But about the inspiration of a film, your experience more from inside or outside? So the inspiration of because you mentioned some novels, okay, but other movies, other films, is something coming from inside, from the interior, or also coming from the reality around, some suggestion or provocative issue coming from outside?
The inspiration for a film honestly can come from anywhere. It can come from your life. It can come from the lives of people that you know. It can come from, for example, Dead Ringers, a movie about twin gynecologists with Jeremy Irons playing both twins, came from an article that I read in Esquire magazine that was called Dead Ringers. And when I read about it, I said, this is an incredible story. Obviously, someone will make a movie about it. And then 10 years later, nobody had made a movie about it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have to make that movie. And before I read that article, it was a little clip in a newspaper, and the heading was "Twin Docs Found Dead in Posh Pad," and I thought, that's a movie. And then I read the article, the very detailed Esquire article about these actual two New York identical twin gynecologists. So it came from there very specifically. But it can come from anywhere. It can come from a joke. It can come from an image. It can come from a dream. And there's no consistency. You know, you just, I think often people talk about my film Videodrome as anticipating the internet because it posited an interactive television. And it was, I wasn't trying to be a prophet. It was because of an experience I'd had with television at the time. I had my house, we had antennas then, you know, and we had a rotatable antenna that would pick up signals. And at night, when the local TV stations went dark, if you played with the antenna, you would get broadcasts from some strange place. It would be in New York or Buffalo, across the border. And I thought, what if there was a TV station that was very dangerous, and you will only get it at night when all the other stations disappeared. And then I had to imagine what it would be. And eventually it came to this whole structure about a TV station that had a lot of torture and strange things and conspiracy and all of. So it came from, you know, basically from that little experience as a primitive TV. But I was not trying to be a prophet about where technology would go. It turns out that it was prophetic in that sense. It anticipated the internet, basically. But it was not my intention. Once again, it was being playful, thinking, what if, you know, what if?
Alexei Butlinov, pianist. You almost answered now for my question. It's about your movie eXistenz, because I thought it was 2000, so 26 years ago. And for me, for that time, I thought it can be prophecy about virtual reality and video games who can be so great, so seductive that people can just immerse in it and forget about real life. My question, you really had this idea that of this threat, or it was just for your story? Yeah, it was a great story with atmosphere and action and everything. But for me, it was like prophecy of this danger of this development of human beings.
Yeah. I was not an obsessive video game player, but I had children who were. And I did play some games, and some of them were quite scary. They were very realistic, not physically realistic. It was still quite primitive, but I could see that you are drawn into those games very emotionally because you are a character in them and you are in that world. I thought, well, eventually this is going to get more and more sophisticated and will become more and more real until you're at the point where you can't really tell the difference between the game and so-called reality. You are really in another reality that feels as real to you and is as dangerous to you as your so-called normal reality. So that's really where it came from. It was once again as saying, this is interesting. What if it went further, you know? It was as simple as that. And then, of course, that's the easy part. The hard part is to create that world cinematically.
Thank you.
Now, once again, thank you very, very much, David, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.